I am Genesis, 29 years old, and I experienced the deepest pain when my mother publicly declared, "We are ashamed of you," during our family Christmas dinner. She laughed mockingly in front of everyone, unaware that her words shattered my heart after years of trying to meet her expectations. What I said next not only made my mother burst into tears, but forever changed our relationship. Before I share this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if you have ever experienced hurt from someone you love. Growing up, I always looked forward to family gatherings, especially Christmas, the twinkling lights, the scent of pine, and the promise of warmth and togetherness. But this year, as I packed my bags to head home, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Family reunions were complicated for me, particularly because of my relationship with my mother. From my earliest memories, my mother was never satisfied with anything I did. If I got an A-, she would ask why it was not an A+. If I won second place in a competition, she would point out the girl who came in first. There was always someone better, someone more accomplished, someone more worthy of praise than me. "Look at Jennifer Hamilton and her daughter," she would say at family dinners. "She just got accepted to Yale Law School and she speaks 4 languages." Or "Your cousin Marcus just opened his 3rd restaurant and he is only 28. The comparisons were endless and exhausting. My mother's Elise was a respected neurosurgeon in our community. My father, Luke, was a federal prosecutor. Success in our family meant following one of 2 paths: medicine or law. There was no third option. So, when I announced during my sophomore year of college that I was switching my pre-law major to photography, it was as if I had committed a cardinal sin. "Photography?" My mother had scoffed, her face twisted with disappointment. "That is not a real career, Genesis. Artists are a dime a dozen. You will be struggling your whole life." I still remember how my father sat silently at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on his coffee mug. He never contradicted my mother, never stood up for me. His silence was its own form of rejection. Despite their disapproval, I persisted. I graduated with honors in fine arts and moved to Denver to pursue my career. The first few years were indeed difficult, just as my mother had predicted. I worked as a barista in the mornings, a gallery assistant in the evenings, and shot weddings on weekends. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with paper-thin walls and shared a laundry room with 8 other tenants. During those struggling years, my mother never failed to remind me of my mistake. Phone calls home were brief and tense. "Not too late to apply to law school," she would say, without asking how my photography was going. When I did share small victories, like getting my work displayed in a respected downtown gallery, she would change the subject or diminish the achievement. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear your brother Salem got another partnership offer?" Slowly but surely, however, my career began to take shape. I landed a contract as a freelance photographer for a major magazine. My portrait series on healthcare workers started gaining national attention. Ironically, my background as a surgeon's daughter gave me unique access to medical professionals who trusted me to tell their stories through my lens. But my parents, especially my mother, saw my work as a betrayal rather than a success. Over the past 3 years, our relationship had grown increasingly distant. We spoke on the phone perhaps once every few months, brief conversations filled with weather talk and superficial updates. I avoided going home for holidays, making excuses about photography assignments or travel plans with friends. The truth was, I could not bear the weight of disappointment that hung in the air whenever I was around my family. This Christmas was different, though. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. At 84, her health was fragile, and my mother had called to say that this might be Grandma Rose's last Christmas. Despite my reservations, I knew I had to go. Grandma Rose had always been my ally, the one person in the family who supported my artistic dreams and slipped me encouraging notes when no one was looking. So, I requested time off work, packed my camera equipment in suitcase, and prepared myself emotionally for what I knew would be a challenging holiday. I had no idea just how challenging it would become, or that this Christmas would mark a turning point in my relationship with my mother that none of us could have anticipated. The drive back to my hometown in Colorado was long and tiring. Snow had started to fall the night before, coating the highway in a treacherous layer of slush. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my emotions as turbulent as the winter weather. Part of me was excited to see Grandma Rose, and if I was honest with myself, I still harbored a childlike hope that this year would be different. Maybe my mother would finally acknowledge my career achievements. Maybe my father would speak up for once. Maybe we could just enjoy being together without the undercurrent of disappointment. I had packed thoughtful gifts for everyone. For my father, a first edition of his favorite crime novelist. For my mother, a silk scarf in her favorite shade of emerald green. For Salem and his wife, Skylar, tickets to a concert they had mentioned wanting to see. For my younger sister, Olivia, a vintage camera similar to one she had admired in an antique store when we were teenagers. And for Grandma Rose, I had compiled a photo album of all my published work, bound in leather with her name embossed on the cover. As I turned onto the familiar oak-lined street where I grew up, my childhood home came into view. It was a large Tudor-style house with pristine stone facade and perfect landscaping, even in winter. The Christmas decorations were impeccable, as always, with matching wreaths on every window and a professionally installed light display that put the neighbors to shame. My mother had always been concerned with appearances. I parked my modest Subaru next to Salem's gleaming BMW and my sister's Audi. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my bags and gifts and approached the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open. There she is! My father stood in the doorway, his hair grayer than I remembered. He gave me a quick, somewhat awkward hug. Good drive? Not bad, I lied, not wanting to start with complaints. It is good to see you, Dad. As I stepped into the foyer, my mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She gave me a once-over, her eyes lingering on my simple jeans and sweater. Genesis, she said with a nod, not moving to hug me. You look pale. I suppose that is what happens when you do not have proper health insurance. And there it was, not even 5 seconds in the door. Nice to see you too, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice light. The drive was fine, thanks for asking. She pursed her lips but said nothing more as she turned back toward the kitchen. My father gave me an apologetic look before taking my coat. In the living room, Salem and his wife Skylar were sitting on the sofa with their 2 children, Emma and Jack, aged 7 and 5. Salem stood up and gave me a proper hug. Hey sis, been a while. Skylar smiled warmly. The kids have been excited to see their Aunt Genesis. The children looked up briefly from their tablets before returning to their games. I noticed my sister Olivia sitting in the corner armchair, scrolling through her phone. At 26, she was the baby of the family and had always been my mother's favorite, following dutifully into the medical profession. Hi, Liv, I said. She glanced up. Hey, she replied, then returned to her phone. Her fiancé Ulysses, whom I had only met once before, gave me a polite nod from across the room. I set my bags down and was about to ask about Grandma Rose when my mother's voice carried from the kitchen. Genesis, you look thin. I suppose that is what happens when you do not have a steady paycheck. I bit my tongue. 1 hour. I had been home less than 1 hour. My work is actually going really well, Mom. I just signed a contract for a major exhibition next spring. She responded, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. Salem just made partner at his firm. Did he tell you they are buying a vacation home in Vail? And so it began, the steady stream of comparisons, the subtle digs, the reminders of how everyone else in the family was achieving real success, while I was just playing to be an artist. Your outfit is quite casual for Christmas, she remarked later as I helped set the table. Skylar brought a beautiful designer dress, but I suppose on a photographer's income, you do what you can. Each comment was like a paper cut, small enough to dismiss individually, but collectively painful. I focused on arranging the silverware perfectly, knowing any mistake would be pointed out. It was not until Grandma Rose arrived, driven by my aunt, that I felt a genuine warmth in the house. At 84, she was frailer than when I had last seen her, but her eyes lit up when she spotted me. "My Genesis!" she exclaimed, opening her arms. I rushed to hug her gently, careful not to squeeze too hard. "I have missed you, Grandma," I whispered, feeling tears prick my eyes. She held me at arm's length and looked me over, but unlike my mother's critical gaze, hers was filled with love. "I am so proud of you," she said softly. "I saw your portrait series in that magazine. You have a gift, my girl." My mother cleared her throat behind us. "Mother, you should sit down. You need to conserve your energy." Grandma Rose winked at me before allowing herself to be led to her seat. As she passed my ear, she whispered, "Stand your ground, darling. Always." Throughout the afternoon, I tried my best to blend in with the family dynamic. I helped my mother in the kitchen, though every task I performed was scrutinized and often redone to her specifications. I played with Emma and Jack, finding genuine joy in their innocent enthusiasm for Christmas and their stories about school. I carefully avoided controversial topics, sticking to safe subjects like the weather and local news. When Salem started talking about politics, a subject guaranteed to create tension, I excused myself to check on Grandma Rose, who was resting in the den. She patted the seat next to her. "Tell me about your life, my dear, the real version, not the one you tell your mother." For 20 precious minutes, I shared with her my actual successes, my challenges, my hopes for the future. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering genuine encouragement. It was a brief respite from the walking on eggshells feeling that characterized the rest of the house. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," she said, referring to my late grandfather, who had been a war photographer. "You bought his artistic eye, you know." That small moment of validation meant more to me than any professional accolade I had received. If only the rest of the family could see me through Grandma Rose's eyes. But as the afternoon progressed toward evening and the time for Christmas dinner approached, the tension in the house grew palpable. I helped set the formal dining room table, polished the silver that only came out for special occasions, and braced myself for what was to come. The Edwards family Christmas dinner was a formal affair, as it had been for generations. The dining room table, extended to seat 10, was covered with the crisp white tablecloth that belonged to my great-grandmother. Fine china plates with gold rims were positioned perfectly at each setting, accompanied by heavy sterling silver cutlery that had been in the family for over a century. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and deep red poinsettias served as the centerpiece, flanked by tall, tapered candles. The scent of roasted prime rib wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the aroma of my mother's famous garlic mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce made from scratch, and freshly baked rolls. Despite my complicated feelings about being home, I could not deny that my mother was an excellent cook, a skill she had tried and failed to instill in me over the years. "Dinner is served," my mother announced at precisely 6:30. Another family tradition. We filed into the dining room in an almost ceremonial fashion. My father took his position at the head of the table, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He had turned 60 last year, and the stress of his high-pressure legal career showed in the deep lines around his eyes and the slight stoop of his shoulders. My mother sat at the opposite end, her posture perfect as always, her makeup flawless despite having spent the day cooking. At 58, she still maintained the disciplined appearance of someone who believed control was the highest virtue. Salem and Schuyler sat to my father's right with their children. Olivia and Ulysses were placed to his left. I was seated next to Skylar, with Grandma Rose beside me. I was grateful for this arrangement, knowing my grandmother would provide moral support through what was bound to be a challenging meal. As the food was passed around, the conversation initially revolved around safe topics: the prime rib's tenderness, the perfect seasoning of the potatoes. But soon, as the wine flowed, my mother steered the discussion toward family updates. "Salem, why don't you tell everyone about your new position?" she prompted, beaming with pride. My brother straightened in his chair. "Well, the firm made me senior partner last month, youngest in the company's history." He swirled his wine glass. "They're also putting me in charge of the new international division. We'll be spending more time in London next year." "That's wonderful," my mother gushed. "And Skylar, the children's school is accommodating the move?" Skylar nodded. "They're attending an international preparatory academy, very exclusive, but Salem's firm arranged everything." My mother turned to Olivia. "And your residency plans, darling? Have you finalized your specialty?" Olivia perked up, finally setting down her phone. "I've been accepted into the cardiothoracic surgery program at Johns Hopkins. Ulysses' father knows the department head there." Ulysses smiled. "My family has donated to their research wing for years. It opens certain doors." I took a large sip of wine, trying not to roll my eyes. Ulysses came from old money, a fact that had immediately endeared him to my status-conscious mother. "Genesis," my father said suddenly, perhaps noticing my silence, "how are things with you?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt a momentary panic. In this family, the question was never innocent. It was an invitation to be judged. "Things are good," I said carefully. "I had a portrait series featured in National Geographic last month." "National Geographic," Grandma Rose said, her eyes lighting up. "That's a prestigious publication." I nodded, feeling a small surge of confidence. Yes, it was about rural healthcare workers. It actually led to a documentary deal with Netflix. "That's wonderful, dear." My grandmother squeezed my hand under the table. I continued, emboldened by her support, received the International Photography Award for my healthcare series, and I took a deep breath. A major gallery in New York wants to represent my work exclusively. "A gallery?" My grandmother clapped her hands together. "Oh, Genesis!" I glanced around the table. Salem was studying his plate. Olivia was typing something on her phone under the table. My father looked like he wanted to say something supportive, but his eyes darted to my mother, and he remained silent. My mother raised an eyebrow. "It's just one magazine feature, Genesis. Let's not get carried away." "Actually, it was a 12-page spread," I corrected gently, "and the award is quite competitive." "Speaking of competitive," my mother turned to Salem. "Tell everyone about Emma's science fair project. First place, wasn't it?" Just like that, my moment was over, my achievements dismissed, and the conversation redirected. "First place in her age group," Salem confirmed, though I noticed he at least had the grace to look somewhat uncomfortable. "She worked for months," Skylar added. "That's what it takes to excel." "That's what it takes," my mother said pointedly. "Dedication, structure, discipline, not just taking pictures of whatever catches your fancy." I felt my cheeks burning, but said nothing, focusing instead on cutting my prime rib into unnecessarily small pieces. "Genesis photography requires tremendous skill and artistic vision," Grandma Rose interjected. "I saw her healthcare series. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking, real art that serves a purpose." My mother's lips thinned. "Mother, I don't understand why you enjoy looking at such depressing subjects. Healthcare is not nearly as problematic as these sensationalist photos make it seem." My series was based on 6 months of research. I interviewed over 40 healthcare workers in underserved communities. Let's not discuss work politics at dinner, my father interjected, clearly sensing the building tension. The prime rib is excellent, Zalise. You've outdone yourself this year. My mother did not appreciate being cut off. Luke, she said, her voice sharp, I was merely pointing out that some careers require years of rigorous training and expertise, while others— She let the implication hang in the air. The atmosphere around the table grew heavy. Schuyler caught my eye and gave me a sympathetic look, which I appreciated but found insufficient. Where was everyone's voice when it actually mattered? As dinner progressed, my mother steered the conversation toward what she considered real success in life. Property ownership, professional status, and conventional family structures were, in her view, the only valid metrics of a worthwhile existence. Salem and Schuyler just purchased their 4th investment property, she announced, as if reading from her children's resume, and Olivia and Ulysses are looking at penthouses in Manhattan after the wedding. I nodded and smiled, trying to appear interested while feeling increasingly invisible. The subtle message was clear. These were the accomplishments that mattered, not taking pictures or winning art awards. My father, perhaps sensing my discomfort, attempted to change the subject. The cranberry sauce is particularly good this year, Zalise. Did you try a new recipe? My mother frowned slightly at the interruption. No, it's the same recipe I've always used. She turned to me. Genesis, have you learned to make cranberry sauce yet? Or any proper meals? A woman your age should know how to cook. I can cook what I need to, I replied evenly. I make excellent Thai curry. Thai food, my mother scoffed, hardly nutritious. When I was your age, I was preparing full holiday meals while working 70-hour weeks at the hospital and managing a household. The subtext was clear. My life as a single, childless woman was somehow incomplete, regardless of my professional accomplishments. Not everyone follows the same timeline, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Clearly, though at 29, the timeline for certain things does become concerning. Before I could respond, little Jack knocked over his water glass, sending liquid streaming across the white tablecloth toward my mother's end of the table. There was a moment of chaos as Schuyler jumped up to help, but my mother was faster, grabbing napkins and shooting a stern look at the child. But then, remarkably, she turned her irritation toward me. Genesis, you were sitting closest to him. You should have been watching. I began, confused by the illogical accusation. If you had more experience with children, you would know to keep an eye on their drinks. This tablecloth is an heirloom. I stood up to help clean the spill, biting back the retort that formed in my mind. Jack looked on the verge of tears, and I gave him a reassuring wink to let him know it was okay. Schuyler mouthed sorry to me as she settled her son back in his seat. With the minor crisis averted, my mother launched into what I recognized as her favorite lecture format. When I was your age. By 29, she began, refilling her wine glass. I was the youngest attending physician in my department. I had 2 children, a mortgage nearly paid off, and was publishing research papers in addition to seeing patients. Times were different then, Mom, I ventured. Excuses, she dismissed with a wave of her hand. The truth is, this generation doesn't want to work hard or make sacrifices. You think taking a few pictures is the same as saving lives or building a business. I felt my patience wearing thin. My work may not save lives directly, but it has helped expose inequities that harm patients. That healthcare series led to policy changes at 2 major insurance companies. A real doctor could have done more from the inside, she countered. I never wanted to be a doctor, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The table fell quiet. This was the unforgivable sin in our family, the rejection of the path laid out for me. Attempting to recover the moment, I shared my news again, hoping someone might actually engage with it. About that gallery representation I mentioned, they're offering me a solo exhibition next fall. It would be my first major show in New York. I had been saving this news, hoping it might finally earn my mother's respect. A solo exhibition was substantial, tangible, something even she couldn't dismiss as just taking pictures. There was a pause. My grandmother smiled encouragingly. My father looked genuinely interested for a moment. Then my mother did something I will never forget. She laughed. Not a genuine laugh of joy or even a nervous chuckle. It was a dismissive, mocking laugh. She looked around the table as if inviting others to join in her amusement at my ridiculous aspirations. "Let me be honest with everyone," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the now silent dining room. "We are ashamed of you, Genesis." The words hit me like a physical blow. We, not just her, but a collective family shame. Nearly 30 years old and still living like a college student, chasing these dreams that go nowhere. Everyone else has built something real, something substantial. She left again, and to my horror, Salem gave a small chuckle. Olivia smirked slightly. My father and grandmother remained stone-faced, but their silence felt like complicity. Skylar looked uncomfortable, and Ulysses seemed to be studying his plate with intense interest, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. I sat there feeling the blood drain from my face, unable to breathe properly. It was as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. All those years of trying to earn approval, of hoping that eventually my path would be respected, if not understood, collapsed in an instant. The public humiliation, in front of extended family no less, was beyond anything I had expected even from my mother. I had been prepared for dismissal, for changing the subject, even for criticism. But open mocking? Declared shame? This was new territory, and something inside me shifted fundamentally in that moment. The dining room fell into a thick silence after my mother's declaration. The clink of silverware against china stopped. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their usual fidgeting stilled. I carefully placed my knife and fork on the edge of my plate. I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Years of suppressed feelings, of swallowed retorts, of tears cried silently into pillows, came rushing back. Memories flashed through my mind. The time my mother threw away my darkroom chemicals in high school because I was wasting time that should be spent on AP biology. The graduation day when she complained about my choice of art school instead of celebrating. The countless times my achievements were dismissed while my siblings were elevated. Without fully planning to, I found myself standing. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from my mother's irritation to my grandmother's concern. "Genesis, sit down," my mother said sharply. "You're making a scene." For once, her commanding tone didn't intimidate me. I looked directly into her eyes, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time, not as an authority figure to be feared, but as a flawed human being whose approval I no longer needed to chase. "I need to say something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "not just for myself, but for all of us. This is hardly the time for one of your dramatic moments," my mother began. But I continued as if she hadn't spoken. "For as long as I can remember," I said, looking around the table, "I have lived under the weight of expectations that were never my own. Since childhood, every choice I made was measured against some impossible standard." I turned to my mother. Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep because nothing I did was ever good enough for you? Do you have any idea what it feels like to be constantly compared to others and always found lacking? My mother's expression flickered between surprise and defensiveness. We only wanted what was best for you. We pushed you because we knew your potential. No, I said firmly. You pushed me toward what you wanted me to be, not who I actually am. There's a profound difference. I took another deep breath. When I chose photography instead of medicine, it wasn't a rejection of you. It was me finally listening to myself. But instead of supporting me, you made me feel like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal. I turned to my father. And you, Dad, your silence all these years has been its own form of rejection. Every time Mom criticized my choices and you said nothing, you were choosing a side. My father looked down, unable to meet my gaze. The irony is that I have succeeded despite the lack of support. Do you know how hard it is to build a career with no safety net, no encouragement, no one telling you they believe in you? I described the early years after college, working multiple jobs while trying to build my portfolio, the freezing studio apartment, the nights spent questioning my choices, the rejections from galleries. I survived on ramen and coffee for months so I could afford film and printing costs. I worked wedding photography jobs I hated to pay rent while building my actual portfolio. Not once did I ask you for help because I knew it would come with conditions I wasn't willing to accept. My voice grew stronger as I continued, filled by years of unspoken truths. And yet, I persisted. That healthcare series you so casually dismissed, it took 8 months of research. I traveled to 12 different rural communities. I documented the stories of healthcare workers who risk their lives for communities that can barely pay them. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I've built a career doing work that matters to me, that helps others, that challenges systems that need challenging. And I did it without compromising who I am. My mother started to speak, but I held up my hand. Not finished yet. You say you're ashamed of me. That cuts deeper than you know. But what hurts most isn't that you don't support my career choice. It's that you've never tried to understand me, to see me for who I actually am, rather than who you wanted me to be. I turned directly to my mother, my voice softening slightly. Mom, you say the family is ashamed of me, but the truth is, I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud. Every photograph, every award, every achievement, there was always a small part of me that hoped this would be the one that finally earned your approval. My mother's expression changed, the certainty in her eyes wavering. The most painful thing isn't that you don't support my career choice. It's that you've never asked yourself why your love seems to have so many conditions attached to it. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence until my father finally found his voice. Genesis is right, he said quietly, the first time I could remember him directly contradicting my mother. We haven't been fair to her. My mother looked at him in shock through her tears, as if this betrayal was even worse than my outburst. Luke! It's true, Zelise, he continued, his voice growing stronger. I've watched for years as you dismissed Genesis's choices and achievements. I said nothing because it was easier to keep the peace. That was wrong of me. He turned to me, his eyes filled with regret. I followed every article written about your work, Genesis. I keep clippings in a folder in my desk at the office. I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, but I was too much of a coward to say so. This revelation stunned me. All these years, I had assumed my father was indifferent to my work. Salem cleared his throat. I should say something too. He looked uncomfortable, but determined. Genesis, that laughing thing earlier, that was messed up. I didn't know what to do, so I just went along with it. I've actually shown your healthcare photos to colleagues at my firm. That piece on rural medical access helped us restructure our pro bono legal services. Olivia, to my surprise, had tears streaming down her face. I was always jealous, she admitted in a small voice. You had the courage to go your own way. I just did what was expected. She glanced at her mother, then back to me. I love medicine now, but I always wondered what it would be like to make my own choice the way you did. Skylar, Salem's wife, spoke up unexpectedly. I've followed your work for years, Genesis. I've always admired your photography and your integrity. I'm sorry I never said anything when your achievements were dismissed. Throughout these revelations, my mother continued to cry, but the nature of her tears seemed to be changing. The initial shock and hurt were giving way to something deeper, more reflective. Grandma Rose slowly stood up, her aged frame requiring effort to rise. She placed a hand on my shoulder and another on my mother's. This conversation has been a long time coming, she said, her voice thin but strong. Zelise, my dear daughter, you're making the same mistake I made with you. My mother looked up in surprise. I pushed you away from your own dreams, she continued. Did you know your mother wanted to be an artist too? She said, looking at me. She painted beautiful landscapes as a girl, but I insisted she pursue medicine instead. More practical, more prestigious, I told her. And now the cycle continues. My mother stared at her own mother in disbelief. This was a family history I had never known. The revelations kept coming. Layers of family dynamics suddenly exposed after decades of silence. The perfect Christmas dinner had transformed into something raw and real, uncomfortable, but perhaps necessary. After several minutes of emotional exchanges, I felt the need for space. The intensity of the moment, the unexpected turns, the years of pent-up feelings suddenly released. It was overwhelming. I think I need some air, I said quietly, standing up. This is a lot to process. Don't leave, my mother said, reaching towards me, her voice vulnerable in a way I had never heard before. Please, Genesis, we need to talk about this. We will, I promised, but I need some time to think. We all do. Let's talk tomorrow when emotions aren't so high. My mother looked like she wanted to object, but my father placed a hand on her arm. Let her go, Zelise. She's not running away. She's just asking for space. I nodded gratefully to my father, picked up my purse, and walked out of the dining room. As I passed the Christmas tree in the living room, the ornaments and lights that had always symbolized our family's perfect facade now seemed different, more authentic somehow, imperfect but real. I stepped out into the cold December night, taking deep breaths of the crisp winter air, feeling both drained and strangely lightened. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth to my family. And while the outcome was still uncertain, I knew something fundamental had changed. I drove through the snow-covered streets to a small hotel about 20 minutes from my parents' house. The night clerk gave me a sympathetic look as I checked in, probably assuming I was a traveler stranded by holiday traffic or weather. In truth, I was stranded in a different way, caught between the family dynamics I'd just upended and whatever new reality would emerge in the aftermath. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, emotions swirling through me like the snowflakes outside the window. Relief, anxiety, guilt, hope, uncertainty, all competing for dominance. I had finally said what needed to be said after years of silence, but I had no roadmap for what came next. I called my best friend, Maya, who had listened to my family stories for years. "You did what?" she exclaimed when I told her what had happened. "Genesis, I'm so proud of you," How do you feel? Honestly, like I might throw up, I admitted, but also lighter somehow, like I've been carrying this massive weight for so long that I stopped noticing it until it was gone. Your mother actually cried in front of everyone? Not just cried, sobbed. I've never seen her like that, not even when Grandpa died. What are you going to do tomorrow? I don't know, I sighed. Part of me wants to just drive back to Denver and send a text when I get home. But you won't do that, Maya said, knowing me too well. No, I won't. Whatever happens next, I need to see it through. After hanging up, I tried to sleep but found myself editing photos instead, pouring my thoughts into the digital images on my laptop. As a photographer, this was how I had always processed my deepest emotions, turning raw feelings into visual stories on screen. I worked until nearly 3 in the morning, finally falling into a fitful sleep just as dawn began to break. I was awakened at 7:30 by my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering, steeling myself for recriminations or demands that I apologize for ruining Christmas. But when I finally said hello, the voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable, soft and uncertain. Genesis, it's Mom. Hi, Mom. I was hoping I wondered if we could talk, just the two of us. I was surprised by the request. My mother had always preferred to have discussions with the full weight of family consensus behind her. Okay, I agreed cautiously. Where and when? There's a coffee shop in town, Riverside Cafe. Do you remember it? Of course I remember it. It was where I had spent countless hours as a teenager, editing photos on my laptop and dreaming of a career behind the camera. I can be there in an hour. Thank you. And those two simple words, spoken with genuine gratitude rather than obligation, told me that something had indeed shifted. Riverside Cafe had barely changed in the decades since I had been a regular. The same mismatched furniture, the bookshelf filled with well-worn paperbacks for customers to borrow, the scent of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon pastries. It had been my refuge once, a place where I could be myself without judgment. My mother was already there when I arrived, seated in a corner booth with 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup, revealing faint shadows under her eyes that suggested a sleepless night. I ordered you a caramel macchiato, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. You used to love those. The fact that she remembered this small detail from my teenage years surprised me. I still do. Thank you. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, both cradling our mugs. I didn't sleep last night, she finally said. I kept replaying everything you said at dinner and everything I've said to you over the years. I waited, giving her space to continue. You were right, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. I have been trying to make you into someone you're not. I never stopped to consider that your path might be valid, even if it was different from what I had planned. She took a sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I was so afraid, Genesis. Afraid you would struggle, afraid you would fail, afraid you would blame me for not pushing you toward a more secure path. I needed support, Mom, not control. She nodded slowly. I see that now. Too late, perhaps, but I do see it. It's not too late, I said, surprising myself with the offer of reconciliation. Not if things change going forward. My mother looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. I want to tell you something I've never told anyone, not even your father, she said. She described how before meeting my father and going to medical school, she had dreamed of becoming an artist. She had filled sketchbooks with landscapes and portraits, had even been accepted to a prestigious art program. My parents, especially my mother, were horrified. They had sacrificed so much to give me opportunities, they said. Art wasn't a real career. It was selfish to choose passion over practicality. I listened, stunned, as my mother revealed this hidden dimension of herself. I gave it up, she continued. I chose medicine, which I came to love in its own way, but there was always this question in the back of my mind. What if? She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, pushing it across the table to me. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. I unfolded it carefully to find a small painting reproduced in a college art magazine, credited to Zalise Johnson, my mother's maiden name. I keep this hidden in my jewelry box, she admitted. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, remembering the joy I felt when I saw my work in print. I studied the painting, a watercolor landscape of mountains reflected in a lake. The technique was beautiful, full of emotion and skill that I had never known my mother possessed. Mom, this is really good, I said, honestly. When you chose photography, she said softly, it brought back all those feelings, all those questions. Part of me was proud of your courage, but another part was jealous that you were doing what I had been afraid to do. And a third part was terrified you would face the same discouragement I had. So instead of supporting you, you became the discouragement yourself, I said, the realization dawning. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Instead, I became the source of it. Can you ever forgive me? In that moment, I saw my mother truly for the first time, not as the intimidating, perfect figure of my childhood, but as a complex woman with her own regrets and unfulfilled dreams, her own fears and insecurities. I forgive you, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. But things need to change. They will, she promised, starting now. We spent the next 2 hours talking more openly than we ever had before. She asked genuine questions about my work, my process, my goals. I shared the challenges and triumphs of my career path. We both cried at times, but also laughed, discovering connections we had never allowed ourselves to explore. When we finally returned to the house, the family was waiting anxiously. My father embraced me properly for the first time in years. Salem apologized again for his behavior. Olivia showed me her secret sketchbook, confessing she had been drawing privately for years, inspired by my example, but afraid to share it with anyone. Grandma Rose watched it all with a satisfied smile, occasionally catching my eye with a wink that said, "See, I told you to stand your ground." Over the following months, our family began a slow, sometimes awkward process of rebuilding relationships based on authenticity rather than expectations. My mother and I spoke weekly. Our conversations gradually became less strained, more genuine. She read about my exhibitions and offered thoughtful feedback. I learned more about her medical career and gained a new appreciation for her accomplishments. When my New York gallery exhibition opened in September, she was the first person I called. Not only did she congratulate me sincerely, but she also flew out to attend the opening night, her medical expertise proving invaluable when explaining the context behind my healthcare photography to visitors. By the time the next Christmas arrived, I returned home with my latest portfolio in hand. To my astonishment, my mother had organized a small gathering of family, friends, and local gallery owners, creating an impromptu showcase in the living room where I had once been told my artistic dreams were impractical. As I discussed my work with genuinely interested guests, I caught my mother watching me from across the room, pride evident in her eyes. Later, she presented me with a special gift, a leather portfolio containing her unfinished paintings from decades ago. "Perhaps you can help me find my voice again," she whispered as I opened it. That Christmas taught me perhaps the most profound lesson of my life. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak our truth even when it feels terrifying. Confronting painful family dynamics doesn't always end relationships. Sometimes it transforms them into something healthier and more authentic. The walls we build to protect ourselves often become our prisons. My mother had been trapped in her own expectations just as surely as I had been trapped by them. By breaking through those walls, painful as it was in the moment, we both found a freedom neither of us had known before. I still photograph healthcare workers and social issues, but now I also explore family dynamics and the courage it takes to be authentically yourself in a world of expectations. And sometimes, when I'm struggling with a difficult composition, I call my mother for advice. The woman who once mocked my artistic dreams now sends me articles about photographers she thinks I'd admire and proudly introduces me as my daughter, the artist.